Meeting room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week's Lunch and Learn. On behalf of Primary Stages and ESPA, I welcome you all here today to this Zoom room. Just as a reminder, Primary Stages is an off-Broadway theater company located in New York City, and ESPA, the Einhorn School of Performing Arts, is the school that's a part of Primary Stages for emerging and established artists. My name is Kelly Letourneau. I am a staff member at Primary Stages and ESPA. I'm the ESPA Student Services Associate. You received an email today from me confirming your registration for this. My email is Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, at primarystages.org. If you have any questions about this Lunch and Learn, about our special guest today, about anything we're offering at Primary Stages and ESPA, and I mean what the name of this cat is, if you guys can see the cat, the very adorable cat, send me an email. Kelly at primarystages.org. Its name is Chicken.
Yes.
Its nickname is Chicken.
Yes, the chicken. Absolutely. I'm hoping that there will be a little bit more cat action on this call. At least one. There might be another cat as well. I try to make sure that in everything I do, especially if it's something professional, that there are multiple cats involved. Multiple
cats. Always multiple cats. Well, Gabra Zackman, besides having multiple cats, is a New York City-based actress, audiobook narrator, and writer. She has performed off-Broadway in regional theaters across the country, several Shakespeare festivals, and also did a stint in the theaters of Denver, Colorado. Some credits include Sense and Sensibility by Kate Hamill, 9 seasons and 16 plays with Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival, including Winter's Tale, Hamlet, Twelfth Night, and Cymbeline, just to name a few. She's been seen on TV in Law & Order SVU, and All My Children, as well as a few small film roles, and Gabra is a company member and the outreach director of the Upstart Creatures based in New York City. Gabra also has a parallel career in audiobook narration and has worked in the field for over 15 years. She's recorded over 300 audiobooks to date in nearly every major New York production house and has a home studio as well. She started working in all genres and initially voicing a large amount of romance and chick lit, then adding to it with a great following in sci-fi and fantasy. Currently, she's recording all genres along with a large amount of memoir and nonfiction. She's been nominated for and won several awards for her work. And recently, Gabra was featured not once, but twice on the New York Times podcast, The Daily, as part of their Sunday Read series. Gabra is also a writer and published author of the Bod Squad series. She co-produced the multi-cast audiobooks of the series with Audible, and at this point, Gabra calls herself a multidisciplinary storyteller. And she is an amazing teacher and mentor and dear friend of mine, and like all-around goddess. Gabra Zackman, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm so glad to see so many people joining today. This is really exciting. I'm so happy.
Yay. We're so excited to have you. So Gabra, you do just about everything. So funny story, everyone. I saw Gabra in a play, and when I saw Gabra in a play, it was Sense and Sensibility. I think in 2015, I saw Gabra in that play, and I thought she was so amazing, and I thought she was wonderful. And then when I saw Primary Stages had her as a faculty member a year later, I immediately signed up for the class. Like, no questions asked. I was like, I must study from this woman because she was so fantastic in this show. So just a little background.
And someone asked you at the time, didn't someone say to you, are you a friend of Gabra's? You look like a friend of Gabra's.
I sat next to one of your friends. And one of your friends said,
yeah, it's why the audience laughed so much, is because I packed it with all of my friends. And so that's why everyone was like, are you also a friend of Gabra's? Because she's packed this whole audience already.
So invite your friends to your work and you will just shine even brighter.
All right.
Tell us a little bit about, I'd love to know how you found your way to doing all these different things. If we want to tackle acting first, or writing, or your voiceover work, we're going to touch them all. But how did it all begin for you?
Well, I think it started quite conventionally. I mean, my path was that I loved the theater. I just was passionate about it. And I was determined to be an actor in what I now think of as an extremely conventional way, that I believed that there was really like one or two paths to becoming the kind of actor I wanted to be. I still remember when I was, I went to Northwestern, and when I was living in Chicago, I had written out a 5-year plan of all of the things I wanted. And I subsequently found that I did most of those things, but it took like at least 20, 25 years. I mean, I think I'm still doing the list that was on my "in 5 years I will." So, but it was a love of the theater. That's really what began everything. And it took me some time. I think all of us know that we fit, unfortunately, we tend to be put into, I think, boxes very early on. And the box that I was put into very early on was a box that basically said, you know, you'll work a lot when you're 40, which was not untrue, you know, which was not untrue, but that didn't really help me as a 21-year-old coming out of school. But it took a while to get everything going. And I invariably wound up going to grad school, partly out of frustration and partly because whenever I would walk into a room, people would say, "You're a classical actress," and I didn't know what that meant. So I went to the Academy for Classical Acting in DC for graduate work, ostensibly to figure out what that meant, and indeed wound up doing a tremendous amount of Shakespeare when I got out. So that was very helpful. And somewhere in and amongst all of that, I had the privilege of doing a production of Taming of the Shrew with a great actor and audiobook narrator named Jonathan Davis, who took it upon himself to open doors for me. He said, you know, he said, "I do this thing that everyone always asks me about and you never have, but you're the one who's right for it." And he himself just opened the doors for me to wind up with this 15-year now long career. And for a long time, those things worked in tandem, recording and acting. I would often record by day and then perform in the Hudson Valley at night. Like I was sort of doing that kind of, and it was great to be young and enthusiastic enough to be able to do that. I don't know that that's something that my instrument could necessarily handle or my soul could handle now. That was a lot. But and somewhere in the midst of all that, I moved to Denver because I wanted to see life from a different perspective. I was stuck in a lot of ruts here in New York. And I started to write there really in many ways as a response to my own loneliness, because I didn't know many people there. But in addition, I had gotten a friend of mine who's a writer said her agent was looking for romance submissions, which is something we're all going to be talking about a little bit today as part of the writing prompt. But she said, "I know you always wanted to write something," a best friend said to me, "so why don't you give it a try?" And in fact, that agent wound up representing me and getting me this book deal. But it was really because of both my own loneliness, being in a place where I didn't know anyone. And in addition, it was my feeling of powerlessness. And I imagine that everyone on this call can relate to that, which is that, again, when we approach theater the way we are, in quotes, supposed to, which I think a number of us have done, it puts us into the least powerful position. If we just say, "I am an actor and I'm going to go after this and I'm going to be really at the behest of everyone. I am going to be in everyone else's stories and I'll be wherever someone puts me and I'll always be available to my agent and I'll never go out of town unless it's for a job out of town. And if I have to stay in town because my agent wants me to do this, even though I'd really rather be doing that, I'm going to do it." Because we put ourselves, I think, repeatedly into very, very powerless situations. And I know that I was feeling that way increasingly towards theater, particularly, and the business at large, that I was feeling increasingly like I had no power. And so writing my own stories gave me that kind of power that I had been slowly, I think, losing. And in fact, I feel like something of writing and creating my own work has given me back power in all the other mediums, you know?
Totally.
But that was a long answer to that question. But that's why I wound up going through and being privileged enough to be able to purvey in so many different mediums.
I mean, for such an amazing journey, I think that was actually a pretty concise answer and very well done. It's interesting that you mentioned the powerlessness as artists in our careers, because taking your class was the first time I stepped into a room where the teacher on the first day said, usually these acting classes are set up in a way where I'm the teacher and I am in the position of power, but that's not what's going to happen in this room. So I thank you for that. Because I think so often, at least in my undergraduate training, the empowerment that teachers were trying to give students manifests itself in saying, create your own work, produce your own shows, as opposed to saying, you have power and trust that. So I thank you for that.
That's great. What a great, thank you for reminding me of that lesson. I know that I taught it, but sometimes I think it takes, especially in a class, it often takes the collection of the students to bring out what the teaching is. So that's helpful for me to hear that again.
Anytime, Gabra. So I was, on your website, and in one of your blog posts, or maybe it's on your page about your audiobooks, you wrote, audiobooks began as my day job and turned into one of the greatest crafts. My question for you is, how did a day job, or like what could be called, I don't know, it went kind of from survival to thrival job, I would say, to parallel career to something that was fulfilling. Like, what was that shift? I don't even know if this is a good enough question, but like, how did that manifest in your life?
No, it's a fantastic question. It is in many ways the question, because I think that all of us, when we are trying to be the actors that we wish to be, we all find survival jobs, even if they sound like cool survival jobs, like audiobook narration. And it's very much how I viewed it at first. And I think what that means is that it's less than, that it is what we are doing to get through until we actually make it. And I think when I go back and listen to some of those early recordings, it is less than. I mean, I understand it really, I thought my voice was just so great. I really thought, like, I know exactly how to, and it wasn't until, I had the privilege of recording not for profit first, which means that it wasn't for public consumption. It was for the National Library Service for the Blind. It was for the disabled community. And I've done some of it not too long ago, because I love the service of giving back. But unfortunately, the service I gave to them initially was not the best, because I didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't until I had recorded for many years that I actually listened to an audiobook, and I listened to someone remarkable recording. And then I understood how, to quote a wonderful voiceover teacher named, and agent, or casting director named Sherry Hodes, she would say, voiceover acting is not acting. And I love that quote. I start a lot of my classes by saying that voiceover acting is not acting, because we perceive that it is. We perceive that it's like, oh, well, I can just make my money doing this until I get the jobs that I really want to get. When actually it is just a different form of storytelling and a different kind of performance. And when I see the difference over the years of where I came from, really just like reading a book out, to now where I feel like I am inhabiting a story and teasing the listener or engaging the listener. Or I talk about microphones as being like, you're telling a story into someone's ear, and the intimacy of that. So different from me being like, yeah, let me just read through this thing so I can get to my audition for this TV show later,
Totally.
But it's a great question, because I think a lot of people, and again, it was myself included, would not see audiobook narration as a craft. And wow, it's a tough one. It's taken me so many years of understanding the marathon of it, because there's such long periods of time that you're reading, the craft of the subtlety of it, how to bring different characters to life in the most subtle but distinct ways possible. To feel out a genre, to feel out what the listenership of it might be. It's a pretty profound and complicated craft, and that took me a long time to learn.
When you're not voicing dialogue of different characters and you are the narrator, do you step into being a different character, or do you have or is it kind of like Gabra reading a book, if that makes sense?
It's a great question. I always say that the narrator is actually the main character. Always, no matter what you are reading, whether it's third person, first person, that strange second person, whatever that is, the omniscient, the narrator is always the character. They are always the point of view. And so it can't always be me because it's always coming from a specific point of view, you know? It's more like it's always a different one-person show of what point of view am I coming from.
Amazing. And then when you voice the other characters, is it the narrator interpretation of that person, or do you embody a whole new person?
I love that question. I think in general, it's the narrator's, because the entire umbrella is the narrator telling the story. But it really varies so much from genre to genre. I always use the difference of, you know, I record a lot of nonfiction and a lot of memoir, which is very subtle in terms of voice distinction. We want to give a distinction that it's a voice, but we don't really want to layer anything on top of it, as opposed to sci-fi, in which we want it to be sometimes, you know, we want it to be Darth Vader, unless, but that, I always say it rips your voice, so we don't really want to do that. But you know, in sci-fi, I feel like because of the genre itself, it can be as way out there. You can inhabit it in whatever ways bring the story to the best life, you know?
Mm. Oh, so cool. I could go on and on and on about character interpretation in audiobooks. My question for you is, say today you were going to do a marathon day of recording. What does your like prep or like morning ritual, or maybe it's an afternoon ritual, maybe you record in the evening? What is the getting into the booth like for you?
Yeah, well, it's quite different now. You know, I have a home studio in Queens that is a beautifully built studio in my home. That in and of itself is different from when I record in studios in Manhattan. And all of that's very different from where I've been since Corona struck us all. Whereas that I came up to my mom's place for what I thought was a couple of weeks, and I've been recording out of an old closet, and like recording like really like big, important, amazing books out of my father's old coat closet. It's so weird. So the prep here is so different from the prep that I at home in Queens is so different from the prep to go into studios properly. But I would say that regardless, there is prep, and there has to be prep, or else it's a really rough day. So what I'm trying to do here is every morning I either try to take a bike ride or take a yoga class. And that means that my body is then awake. I just note for myself, I'm not drinking enough water in this heat. Is anyone?
No.
Probably not. But I got really like, I still don't quite feel well today after yesterday, because I was recording in this like hot closet in the midst of this heat wave and really should have doubled my water intake. By the time I got to the end of the day yesterday, I was like, and I also, yesterday was an awkward day to choose to give up sugar. It was just an unfortunate combination of things I did to myself, where by the end of the day, I had this writing group that I was like, I'm normally so charming and funny and engaged, and I hate them. I hate myself. These are some of my favorite people. I hate everyone. Just was like, I just want to go to bed. I wish everyone would leave me alone. Then I started to have a panic attack. And then I ate some sugar because I was like, this is stupid. What did I do to myself today? So all of that to say, the best way to start any day is with some exercise, some breathing and meditation, which is how I try to start every single day, hydration. And then before I go in a booth, I need to be eating something really specific. Stomachs tend to growl a lot, and that's like a very individual issue of what you can or can't have. For me, coffee is fine, but for some other people, coffee is not a great idea, you know. But for me, I'll have like a good cup of coffee, or I take a cup of coffee in with me, and I have something, you know, a bowl of cereal or oatmeal or something that can really sort of pad the stomach for going in. And again, the days are different. You know, if I was in a studio in New York, I could really just sit and record. But being in like a slightly uncomfortable space where there's lots of distractions, you know, I get maybe half as much done here.
I feel like right now we're all getting about half as much done in the spaces we're in.
Listen, I think if we have any job whatsoever, we just thank our lucky stars.
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Well, you do so many things, and you also write. How does that fit into the puzzle of your life?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. And that's some of what I really want to talk about today is, I think when we talk about writing, in my opinion, the biggest thing that anyone will ever talk about is what is your discipline? How are you writing? How does it fit into your life? And I find a writing discipline is an elusive animal and extremely individual. And there is no judgment based on it. There's some people who can sit somewhere and write. There's other people who have to like take a 5-mile run and then they can write. Some people write in the morning. Some people write in the evening. Some people pitter around for a while and then write for whatever. You know, one of the places I used to write best, and it's unfortunate for right now, is on airplanes. I don't know why. I would just sit in an airplane, and if I had the space around me and I could just really write. And I don't know what that was that allowed that to happen, but it's not replicatable anywhere, you know? So, you know, in my life, it has taken such a very long time to figure out, I wrote a bunch of stuff about discipline that I wanted to talk about today, but it's taken me so very long to figure out, I'm writing a note on something I don't want to forget, to figure out what my discipline is. And I had a fellow audiobook narrator and writer who I deeply respect. We were having a conversation at one point, and she said, well, you know, I write it in the evening, you know, like before I go to bed. And I laughed and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Who writes in the evening? That's so bizarre. Well, wouldn't you know, it's been so many years of this, of me being like, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to write, and sometimes I do that very successfully. I have found, here is an offering to everyone. I'll make it again, hopefully by the end, but here's an offering that if you can just wake up and write for 30 minutes, right when you wake up, that is a beautiful way to create a discipline. And you will often unleash more than you think that you could. So that's a practice that I found to be very successful for me. I also note if I have a full day free to write, that I have to like putter around for like 3 hours. It's not like, I have to get rid of my email. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to eat something. I've got to like take a walk, and then I can sit down and write for a couple of hours. But after all these years, I don't know what it was. Maybe I heard her say that, like she writes before bed, and I scoffed at it. This dear friend of mine, I openly scoffed at her, and I've started doing it, and it is the time I write best. It is, if I, like now my mom and I hang out, we have some dinner, we watch some TV. I try to make her stop with this. She's crazy about binging Netflix now, like a little child. My mother, I can't discipline her, but if I can get us to get off of Ozark, you know, so that I can go down and like write for a couple of hours before bed, it is absolutely when my best writing and my freest writing is happening. So I bring that up to say that I don't know if for any of you, you have the experience of maybe you feel like you're sick, but your body still runs beautifully. If you're a runner or a biker, I like to bike myself, that God, I feel horrible. I feel awful. I feel exhausted, but like best yoga class I've ever done, because there's something about the body that is separate from the sort of mind space. And I think the writer's body is another separate entity. So whatever it is, wherever it is that you find your jam, it's very individual, and that's it. And there's no judgment on it. If it means, if you've got to like pitter putter around for 3 hours to do a half hour of writing, then that's what you do. You know, I think that there's a lot online, you know, if you do a Google search, you'll find some really interesting things about discipline, and some will be really helpful and some will not be. But there's a lot about people saying, listen, it's a discipline, just sit and just wait for the thing to come. And I don't know, I don't work that way. I don't work that way. I feel like if it's going to come, it's going to come. And if it's not, it's not. And I can't force it. And I've tried. The only other thing that keeps me writing, and it's happened now a couple of times, is accountability. So, you know, back in the day when I submitted something to this agent, suddenly she kept me accountable. And then I pitched a 3-book series, and suddenly I had deadlines to a publisher. So believe me, I found the time to write. I actually wrote a bunch of stuff backstage at Hudson Valley But once at Hudson Valley and once at the Mint Theater, because I had the smaller roles so that I could like be off stage for a bunch of time writing. But now I have a partner who I'm producing a new series with, an audio series that's coming out soon. I'm accountable to her. And so she has really kept me on task in a way that I don't know that I could have myself. I think often about Kate Hamill and how the reason why she wrote Sense and Sensibility was because she had bet her best friend that she could. And her best friend said, okay, write me a check for, do you remember the amount? Was it $300, $500?
I think it was $100.
Because they had no money. They had literally zero money. And she was like, okay, I will give you this check for $100. And if I do not deliver this script in a month or whatever it was, you can cash it. And indeed, she delivered the script and it began her whole career. But huge and important point, accountability, which for me is massive. It's part of why this writers group is also good for me. They've kept me writing. Yeah.
And that's the group that meets weekly, yeah?
That's right. We meet and have been for years. I mean, the group itself has been going on for 10 some years, and I joined maybe just about 3 years ago, I think is when I joined this group. And I had between when I published the book series and starting this group, I had a real dry spell. I just found I couldn't write. I couldn't do it. I had no ideas and I couldn't do anything. I don't know. And then since I've been with them, I now, writing is a huge part of my life again.
When you were writing the first 3 books of the Bod Squad series, did you like outline what that was going to look like, or are you a writer who it just like the plot comes to?
Yeah, fantastic question. I wanted to talk about outlines as well, because I do think that there are 2 different ways to write, and I don't think everyone always writes the same way. I write best from a general outline, and I tend to really stick to it. Meaning I tend to do a chapter outline of like, chapter 1, this is the basic premise of chapter 2. And I often go back and refer to it. And I find I stick to it pretty sharply. So that for me is a really vital thing to rely on. Within the chapters, they might go in slightly different directions, or, but in general, I stick with it. But I think, for everyone, we were having a conversation in the writers group last night about Jack Kerouac, and about the fact that he was someone who wrote such detailed outlines, and then got to a point where I think sort of his relationship with addiction really overtook him. But he had some kind of thought where he was like, no, a book occurs like in a hotel room in 3 days on speed. That's how you write a book. And I think a lot of his later work then is a little bit less understandable, really, because of that.
So with this work writing, then going back to either audiobook narration or acting, has your experience coming to writing and like publishing books changed how you encounter another writer's text?
Gosh, what a wonderful question. I think, I feel like we're always taught to have such respect for writers in the theater, certainly in the audiobook world. We're always taught to have that kind of respect. But I think having done more of it myself, I feel like I have much more respect just for, no matter what the story is. I mean, the stories I've written a lot of fun, light, sexy romances, capers almost. And yet they were so difficult to write. They took so long to write. It involved so much work. And then the work of like publicizing and getting those out into the world involved so much work that I have such deep respect for writers, a different level maybe than I had before.
I agree. And I've done this much writing, but I find that like just doing this much writing, I encounter a script completely differently. Like I see, or even a book, I'm like, I see so much of the structure or what's at play by doing it. than I ever did just as a consumer.
Yes.
Amazing. What, in this time of Corona, what's helping you right now?
Oh, it's a tough time, right? What did a friend of mine say last night? She was saying Corona grief is very real. You know, the grief of life being so different now than it was. My connections with my community are vital to me. The classes that I take, the people that I connect with, the bike rides that I take, and the yoga classes that I do have really saved me. I think a regular meditation practice, even if it's not a long one, to ground during this time is helpful. And I found that doing this project with this partner of mine, having that to focus on has been like lifeblood, you know, has just been like lifeblood. Having something, and again, we keep saying if what we're putting, the name of this project, by the way, is Nice and Naughty. My idea was to write something, to write short form audio that allowed the listener to choose, did they want a sweet romance, a romance to sweeten their morning coffee, or an erotica to pair with their evening wine. And what my friend and I keep saying is, if what we're putting out into the world is heart and humor and sex, it is exactly what all of us are missing right now, I think, or a lot of us are missing right now. It's how it feels in my life. It just feels like we're in such a barren wasteland. So that's been something I've really, really relied on.
That's beautiful. Since we're talking about Nice and Naughty, do you want to just touch on how that started, what it was all kind of born out of? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had this idea, and I, initially, I had a wonderful writer tell me this once I was at a conference where a writer said to me that we either write things for ourselves or we write things to make money. And he said, do you know the difference? Because I was lamenting. I was like, I love the Bod Squad. It was so successful. People loved it, but it wasn't a huge money maker. And he said, well, did you write it to make money or did you write it for yourself? And I said, well, I think I maybe started to write it to make money, but invariably I wound up writing it for myself. And he said, well, then you know the difference. If you want to write something to make money, write something to make money. If you want to write something for yourself, write something for yourself. And I do know the difference. And I consistently try to write things to make money. And it never turns out that way. So the initial idea for Nice and Naughty was this will be my moneymaker. And that I would write something that was small town and that was a very conventional romance and or erotica. And that I was writing it purely as a money-making idea. And I was like, I've got it. This is the money-making idea. But then it's me. So I was like, well, what small town will I choose? And I was like, well, I don't even know where it came into my mind that I was like, what if it's a group of sisters who have grown up on the North Fork? North Fork of Long Island is a very small town and beautiful. But what if they're living in Queens? Because I love Queens, and like, let's put them all in Queens. And I came up with this idea for them to be living in their Nana's house, that their Nana had passed away. She was a baker, and they're living in her house now, and they're running a bakery and a bar, and came up with this whole kind of idea. And I sat down at one point in my favorite restaurant in Queens, and I wrote a list that I need to now frame for my producing partner, Emily. But I wrote a list called Sexy Queens, which was what I found to be the most sexy about Queens, which is fantastic. I was like sitting in a little Italian restaurant. I'm like looking out at the train platform. I meant to call that up. Maybe at some point, I'll see if I can find the actual list at some point. But I wrote this list of like, what did I find to be sexy about the borough of Queens, which has actually led Emily and I to think that at some point we want to do a show called the sexiest, hashtag the sexiest borough, in which we sort of do like, you know, videos of people talk about our own work, and then do videos of like people saying why they think their borough is the sexiest, and to like have a kind of like borough war of whose borough is the sexiest. But ostensibly, I wrote this list, I came up with this idea, and I began to write the frame of this. And then, so then it's set in Queens. So suddenly my idea for this being like really conventional romance is a little bit, it's like, well, it's Queens, New York, which is an unconventional place, and it's filled with diversity. So it's like, well, I certainly want to write that. So then it becomes a little less conventional. And then after having written this like spine of the, say, the first season, I then connected with Emily, who had created an app for it's, we're like, so the app is sort of getting its way off the ground, but the app was created for short form romance. And specifically, she wanted something for the LGBTQ plus communities and for the BIPOC communities, that she felt like there was stuff lacking, you know, in like short form romance for, in terms of diversity. So she took the work I had done, which I was very, very interested in being this like diverse world. And she was like, we're going to push this further. And so she basically said to me, she was like, you are allowed one cisgendered, straight, heterosexual, white couple in this series, and everyone else has got to be different. And so like a couple of the sisters are adopted, and you know, everyone's from somewhere else. And I wanted it to feel like Queens. In Queens, everyone's from a different place. People are, the series is very sex positive, which means a non-shaming of everyone's sexuality. And that's what we wanted to create. So it has become something that is the beginning of a whole world that we're creating, where we're going to be bringing in, we're almost done with the first season, and we have a bunch of different narrators working on it, but we want there to be a bunch of different writers working on it as well. So we're going to be hiring different writers to come write different tracks. And the idea was sort of like if it could almost be a choose your own adventure of like, if you want to hear more about go to this, you know, if you want to hear more about his journey, go to this series. And that everyone is sort of from a different background with different desires and different, and it's pushed me quite a bit to write, you know, a whole bunch of different interactions, the difference of a romance versus erotica, different, you know, all kinds of different scenarios in Queens, which I absolutely love. So again, that was my attempt initially at something more conventional, which has turned out to be wildly unconventional, but very me, and ostensibly what I would like to be putting my time into doing.
And a wonderful, it's like a community coming together to create a bigger piece.
Yes, yes, yes.
I love that.
Yes.
Yay.
So we are hoping. We have we've got big dreams.
Well, I'm very excited to listen. Shall we go into our list making, since
I think so, since we've introduced it, right?
We've introduced Sexy Queen, so let's
That's right.
make our own lists.
That's right. Well, I had this idea, going to change this because I want to sort of look at whoever I can be looking at. So I had this idea that I thought would be fun because, again, I do feel like there's this isolation that we're all in. We're, for the most part, isolated, quarantined, or just separate from people. If we're out, we have masks on, sometimes gloves on. We can't go to the same social places that we used to go to. Zoom is a poor substitute. And so my challenge to begin, the first challenge here is, could we all make lists of what we find to be, or what we could imagine to be romantic or sexy during this time of COVID and isolation? So this would be the beginning of a love story, really. And I would love to start out that way.
Wonderful. So we're going to take 5 minutes to make these lists, 5 minutes to write a list of what might be romantic or sexy in the current coronavirus reality we are all living in. All right, here we go. I'm putting 5 minutes on That is 5 minutes. Great. So pens down, and Gabra will walk us through the next part.
Okay. Well, I wrote a list myself, I want you all to know. And I just made myself laugh because at the very end of the list, I wrote rom-com with masks, ? How? ? And then I wrote rom-cove. That's what we're all trying to write today. But I really feel like we're all like, what do we all need right now? We all need a rom-com so bad. So this is really what this is geared toward. It's geared toward as anything, really anything that you're inspired to write. But the inspiration for it is, what do we all need right now? I know how much I need this. A laugh and something romantic or sexy or just fun and light. So, okay, let me read you the next part. Yeah, do we need to, can we go right on, Kelly, to the next?
Totally.
Okay, great. So the next part is this. Please do not overthink. I want this to be as simple as possible. Take one idea or a couple of ideas that work together from your own list that you made, and write that idea as either a first paragraph of a novel or story, an outline for a screenplay, or the first few lines of a play. Yeah?
Wonderful. I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock. I'm going to put this into the chat for anyone who wants it written out. And happy writing, friends. 10 minutes is on the clock. And that's 10 minutes of writing. We successfully all wrote for the day.
Awesome. I hope so much that this was, that this brought some levity, some levity to the middle of your day, and a little bit of romance. I hope that it brought that to you, because it's been important for me to write.
I have gotten a few messages from folks who had to bow out it too, who said this has been wonderful. And
good. I'm so glad. Yeah, well, right. A little bit of light, maybe a little bit of light. But that was the intention. You know, I've had to, I believe so much that artists shall inherit the earth. I feel like we are the ones who will be okay after all of this, because we are essentially survivors. And I believe that it is up to our imaginations to pull ourselves through this. So that would be the thing that I think is most important, is whatever it is that you feel might be missing for you now, write it. For me, it's certainly romance, and that's why it's been good for me to write. But whatever that is, write it. And you can start this way, like whatever it is, if it's humor or engagement with other people or whatever, write a list about how those things can happen at this time, and write that story, because I think these are the stories that people want to hear right now.
Yeah.
Right. I know I do.
I do. Well, thank you so much, Gabra.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I wish you all a beautiful rest of your afternoon, and that you might all stay safe and healthy and creative.
So much love for you.
And you.